important shell mounds. The land there is being desecrated, and we want to call attention to sacred sites all over Mother Earth. In fact, Mother Earth is a sacred site. And that's why we're here. Because we're going to challenge developers, corporations, and anybody else that doesn't believe in life and living. All right, Wounded Knee, thank you. And his assistant, our longtime friend, Perry Matlock.
Thank you, Tony. This mic is for recording. I just want to greet each and every one of you. I want to make it very clear here. I'm not a spiritual leader. I'm a warrior. I'm a warrior. My name has nothing to do with the Wounded Knee incident. I can explain that to you later, but we have a lot of stuff to cover. But I honor the people that stood up at Wounded Knee and our ancestors. This is why we're involved with sacred sites. Because Wounded Knee is a sacred place where our ancestors, you know the history of 1890. So I'm going to let my friends speak about the shell mounds so you understand what a shell mound is. And then Morningstar will speak later, and then I'll come and talk about sacred sites, what they're doing to our sacred places where our ancestors lay today. They should never be disturbed. So Perry will speak about the shell mounds so you understand what a shell mound is.
Oh, good morning, everyone. It's really a big honor to be invited as Wounded Knee's assistant to come here and help explain the shell mound phenomenon and some of the work we've been doing. My name is Perry Matlock. I've been a volunteer with the International Indian Treaty Council for about 20 some odd years. And since I was born and raised in San Francisco, I wanted to focus on issues pertaining to the native people of the Bay Area. And most people know about Leonard Peltier, Eddie Hatcher, the situation at Big Mountain, the uranium mining and the Dene territories. But there wasn't a lot of information available about the desecration of the native grave sites, village sites, and ancient monuments in the Bay Area. So by and by, I began putting information together and disseminating information to people, and we started making buttons which would reflect some of the work we were doing. And in 1992, as a volunteer with the International Indian Treaty Council, I noticed that William Means, it was I think April 4th, 1992, he wrote a letter supporting that the Presidio of San Francisco be returned to the Muwekma Ohlone Nation. The Muwekma Ohlone are the native people of San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, Vallejo, and about as far south as Santa Cruz and into the hills of the East Bay, and that includes what people call Mount Diablo, but if you want to have a better name for Mount Diablo, it's better to actually call it Dog Mountain, because long before the Europeans invaded the Bay Area, native people in the Sierra Nevada and in other neighboring areas which had a view of Mount Diablo knew that that's where you could find a dog. You could trade for dogs. There were dogs here before the Europeans arrived. And in the Niasen and Maidu languages, it could roughly translate to Dog Mountain. But that's just a little bit I wanted to include. The native people here did a lot of different things to the environment to alter it. They burnt areas so they can get certain plants to grow. They also have rock carvings, rock paintings, but one of the most obvious adulterations to the landscape were the shell mounds. Some of these shell mounds were huge. The Emeryville Shell Mound, if you're familiar with that, Shell Mound Avenue in Emeryville, it might have been as much as 600 feet long or more, 350 feet wide or more. It might have attained a height of 35 to 60 feet. What I want to do is, if you'll just forgive me, I want to just show you how large these shell mounds might have been. So I'm going to put this tape on the floor for 6 feet. So that's 6 feet. I just want, if you could just imagine that that's 600 feet. And if I could throw my backpack here, of course, the shell mound would have been a lot larger than this, much, much larger. I don't mean to degrade the shell mounds. I just want to give people an idea of the size. So if this here were a shell mound, this could be about 30 or 40 feet. Some of them were only 2 feet high. Some were very small. Many of them were very large. So if you could just imagine something like this, and again, forgive me, I'm just doing this for size. Here are some little toy bears. So I'm just going to pretend that I was living here 500 years ago with some friends or family, and I said, hey, look, there's a bear over on the shell mound. How would we translate that into English? We don't know. We do not know what the word for a shell mound is in the Coast Miwok language, the Yokuts language, or any of the Ohlone languages. We've been breaking our backs asking archaeologists and elders if there's any known word. That was taken away from them. So we like to use the word shell mound because it's at least a physical description. Archaeologists use a word called midden. If you can remember that word midden, M-I-D-D-E-N, it means a dunghill. Just look it up in a dictionary. It comes from Middle English, the Canterbury Tales, or Old Norse. It's a European word, and it means a dunghill. So archaeologists were referring to these ancient monuments, which are used as cemeteries, as waste piles. And if you see some of the archaeology material, they'll actually refer to them as Indian garbage heaps. So a very derogatory attitude had been put forth by the scientific community and by the public at large by accepting that these were just garbage piles, and, by the way, as a footnote, that people were buried in them. So I don't mean to be demeaning. I just want to just give you an idea of size, that these are wonders of the world, and they were here in the Bay Area. I've traveled in Great Britain. I've seen stone circles and stone rows, rock cairns, and are actually pretty well preserved, and people feel as though their ancestors of yesteryear had something to do with them. Here, of course, most of the people are not related here with the earth, so they don't have that kind of connection, and they're disregarded. And it's horrible. That's the way the politicians and developers treat these ancient monuments. I have gone to public hearings. I've been to public hearings with Joan Campbell for the shell mound on Mount San Bruno, and they denied that it was a cemetery until we had a report from an archaeologist that stated that it was over 5,000 years old and that some 20-some-odd bodies were found just by auguring into the shell mound. And we held up the report at one of the meetings, and we called them on it, that you lied. You knew it was a cemetery all along, and you wouldn't do anything about it. I don't really have an overhead projector, but there's something I think you'll be able to see from where you are. I just want to give you an idea of how big these really were. This is a 1852 Coast Survey map, and I think from where you're sitting, you may be able to see this. Do you see these little dots? There's one here and one down there. Are they sort of discernible? Can you see them right there and there? Those were shell mounds. That is what we call the West Berkeley shell mound, for lack of better words, and that's the Emeryville shell mound, for lack of better words. Again, we don't know the names of the villages in those areas. That was taken away from the native people of the Bay Area. But there are still ruins there. There are still people buried there. There's still shell mound material there. They're the cultural treasures of the native people of the Bay Area. There are no legal protections to save these places. There's mitigation and litigation to accommodate their destruction, but there's absolutely no laws whatsoever to protect them, keep them preserved, not only for the native people of the Bay Area, but for the rest of the people of the world to maybe come here and see what are the ancient monuments in this part of the world. So that's something that our government has taken away, not only from the native people, but from the rest of the world, because this is part of the world heritage. It's the Ohlone and Miwok heritage, but it's also part of humanity, and it's something that's been taken away. Here's another map I want to show you. This map was put together by an archaeologist named Nels Nelson. You can probably see all these little dots in numbers around the bay. That's the abundance. That's how many shell mounds there were. There are actually a lot more shell mounds than that, but these are the ones he found in the early 1900s. There's probably about 500 or 600 of them now recorded. Most of them, almost all of them, have been graded, leveled, and in some cases almost completely obliterated off the face of the earth. The shell mounds were used as a commodity. The shell material had been picked out and sold for nurseries, for fertilizer. It was used as a substrate for highways, used as a substrate for tennis courts. There was absolutely no regard for them at all. We found a report in Mill Valley from the early 1900s of kids who had a .22 rifle who used to go down to the shell mound, Lagoma shell mound in Mill Valley, and they used to dig around for bones and skulls, put them on fences, and shoot at them. This is just the last 100 years. So there's a great deal of disregard for these graves, but recently there's much more attention to the public and also to the Native community that this is something that's really important. This is the San Francisco Bay Area, some of the most expensive real estate in the world by capitalist standards. And it's, Ohlone independence is my wish. I'd like to see that. If that's too much to ask for, may the government at least set aside a few acres of land here and there where their ancient monuments are. It's so far the answer is just not, it's just not happening. So, we have these shell mound walks put together by Janella LaRose and Karina Gould, and they've been very educational. People are very supportive, and it's just bringing to light that not only are these ancient monuments and cemeteries, but the Ohlone people, Miwok people who are alive today know they're ancient cemeteries, but they're living cemeteries, living in that the ancestors have not been forgotten. They're still there, and the continuation of worship and celebrating the ancestors is somewhat taken away because of private property laws and because of the demolition of these great ancient monuments. Shell mounds exist all around the world. They're in Scandinavia, Africa, Australia, Southeast Asia. The ones in the Bay Area, though, happen to attain huge proportions. As I described, if you can imagine something that's 600 feet long, several hundred feet in another direction, and coming up maybe 30, 40 feet, not all of them were that large, but some of them were. So it's difficult to put this in perspective because almost all of them are under landfill, under buildings, and some are just totally obliterated. Some of you probably know about Hunters Point. There's a huge complex of shell mounds there. Almost all of them are under landfill. I don't know if any of them can even be saved because of the landfill and toxicity. Yerba Buena Island, where the Bay Bridge is under construction, there's quite a few shell mounds on that little island. And during the construction of the amendments to the Bay Bridge, more grave sites were found. And usually what happens is instead of moving the project somewhere else, the shell mound and the burials are moved. So the project goes on. There are some parts of the world where that just wouldn't happen. The road would bend. The road would turn. The government of Great Britain is going to spend a small fortune to deviate the highways away from Stonehenge, just so that it looks prettier. But Stonehenge is still intact, and it's protected. And that's a great monument for the people of the British Isles. But the people in the United States, except for a small few, it seems, don't have any reverence for these ancient monuments. And that's part of our educational campaign, is that this is a hate crime. This is racism. This is like universally considered a hate crime. If you go somewhere and you start messing with someone's cemetery in an evil way, physically, I mean, kicking it around, digging it up, those are fighting words. And of course, the Ohlone don't have the weapons or the means to have a resistance to the US government, so it has to be done in a nonviolent way. And that's what we're up to. One of the really important issues also, I'm sure all of you are familiar with this, is that a lot of the bones, you wonder what happened to them. They were dug up. Well, a lot of them are in institutions. UC Berkeley houses some 8,000 to 14,000 bones from Native people, mostly from the Bay Area, and they refuse to repatriate them. So it's a part of the portfolio of UC Berkeley to say we have nuclear this, we have Professor so-and-so, we also have all these bones of Native California peoples, and it's part of our collection, part of their prestige. And so that's pretty sickening to see someone else's ancestors as a commodity. And that's pretty much how UC Berkeley is taking this stance. Recently, a law has been changed with Native American Graves and Reparation Act so that the federally unrecognized tribes are culturally unidentifiable. These are legal terms, that these people may attain their ancestors. May. It's not absolute. It's in the subjunctive. It's not binding. So we're trying to work on that and get lawyers to see what may be done so that the ancestors might be properly repatriated to the Muwekma Ohlone Tribal Council, the Federated Coast Miwok Tribal Council, and to other nations in the Bay Area who are waiting for their ancestors and have their ancestors viciously stolen from them, in addition to the grave sites stolen from them. Wounded, is there anything else you want me to? I want to clean this up. No, I'll keep it here, just to bear in mind, just because these monuments are just taken for granted. And if you could just imagine something that's so much bigger, these bears ought to be tiny, But I don't mean to be degrading having bears, but I'm just using that as a size, so you can see.
Thank you, Perry. Greetings to my brothers and sisters and to the elders. I come today to deliver a message of what's going on in this nation about sacred sites and our ancestors. My heart is broken because I've seen these people come and desecrate trees, dig up our ancestors, and put them in museums. It is very sad for our ancestors to be locked up in gym lockers in cardboard boxes, and their sacred objects and artifacts. So I come today to ask for Native American support and non-Native American people that could stand by us in our struggle to protect these sacred burial grounds of our ancestors. Our ancestors protected us many, many years ago, hundreds of years ago, when they stood up against the military, when they came to our villages to destroy our people over land and kill our women. That is an awful thing to do. We as Indian people have a spirit, and we must continue with that spirit in the fight for what we believe in. We have a responsibility as Indian people to speak up. I'm not angry. I'm kind of disturbed when these people come and they desecrate these sacred sites of our ancestors. I stood up against them, but I stood up there with prayer in the spirit of our ancestors. They stood by me and protected me, even when I walked across the United States in 1978, because there was 11 pieces of bill pending in Congress against Native American people. That one bill stood out amongst Indian people. It was called H.R. 9054. I was there in Washington, D.C. That bill was written by Cunningham and Meeks. It stated that all Indian treaties would be terminated by Congress. And we walked through snow, through cold, top of hills, through valleys, to fight for what we believed in as Indian people. And we continue that struggle today, because look what they're doing. Relocation. Andrew Jackson, Relocation Act, 1934, relocated the Cherokee people and many other tribes across this country. Now they want to relocate us when we're put in the earth by the Creator and the spiritual people of our people, and remove them. I say no more. I say it's time for us to stand up and say no more to putting our people in the museums to be looked at. They belong in Mother Earth, where the Creator put them in the spiritual people. I walk by these sacred sites on Shell Mound Walk. Morningstar will explain to you. And when I walk by these sacred places, I offer my prayer, because that's what the spiritual leader told me. Offer your tobacco wounded, offer your song and your medicine, and you can feel them. You can feel the spirit of our ancestors. So the sacred site, these are the sacred sites. Fort Mojave, I've been to Fort Mojave. In the 50s, they dumped chromium. And that chromium leaked into the underground water through their sacred site, to the Mojave people, and into the Colorado River, where their ancestors went to swim. That place has the highest rate of cancer today. San Francisco Peak, they want to turn it into a ski resort by using contaminated snow water turn it into snow, and spray it on that mountain. 13 tribes are fighting the battle to protect that San Francisco peak because it would destroy all their medicine. That's why they're fighting. This is our problem here as Indian people. We have that responsibility. We can't sit back and say, hey, what would our ancestors say to us? What will they say to us? Glen Cove is a very special place. I've been fighting for 12 years, along with other people, not only me. Other Native American people and non-Native American people have joined our cause to protect the Glen Cove sacred site. I walked across the United States in 2008 with my friend Dennis Banks, and this is what we got. Protect sacred sites. All them nations, tribes, bands, and family clans support us to protect these sacred sites of our ancestors. The Glen Cove sacred site is 3,500 years old, dating back to 1500 BC. My mother was born on the Miwok Reservation in Tuolumne, California. You know what they did to my mother? They took my mother and put her in boarding schools. They took her culture. They cut her hair. They took her name from her. Her name was Bungi, which means fast runner in Miwok language, and put a string around her neck with a cardboard and then put a name up there and said, you pick that name. Your name will be Bernice. No longer. And what else did they do to them Indian kids, them little Indian kids and little Indian boys? So the pain is still here. I'm not angry. I'm just disturbed. This is what we have to do as Indian people and non-Native American people. The Glen Cove sacred site is a special place because that's where my ancestors could be at. The Bay Miwoks, Coastal Miwoks, Patwin, Wintu, Ohlone came there. They came there to trade. They came there to do their vision quest, to do their prayer, to have ceremonies, and intergroup and intermarried and bury their ancestors there. And all we ask is for 15 acres. And you know what the word they want to use? Compromise. We want to compromise with me, not me. They want to compromise on our ancestors. That's like taking grandpa and leaving grandma and put grandpa in the museum and leaving her there. They don't need to be separated. They need to stay together. That's how we were taught. So I ask you today to support us. Wherever you go, talk about these sacred sites. Talk about these sacred places. Because this is where your ancestors lay. This is where they are. And it'd be a great honor to see you fight for what they believe in because they fought for you and me. That's why we're still here as indigenous people of this country, as Indian people. We say no more. It's time to stop. It's time to stop putting malls on top of our ancestors. It's time to stop putting swimming pools on top of our ancestors. It is time to stop putting golf courses on top of our ancestors. It's time to stop doing this madness to our ancestors. And what are we going to do as Indian people? So I ask you to help us to protect the Glen Cove sacred site. We had a meeting down there, and I got this theme. It came up because our ancestors were crying. They were crying. Just imagine in 1890 when Wounded Knee, when they killed Chief Bigfoot, what were the ancestors doing? They were crying for them. Along the Trail of Tears in 1834, when they walked because they were forced to walk through the snow with no food. And they froze to death. They left them there, and their ancestors were crying. This is why we came up with the theme, Our Ancestors Are Crying. Because I was crying when I lost my sister. I was crying. So I ask you today, as Earth people, to stay together as Indian people We don't need division. You know what Little Turtle said? Chief Little Turtle said, if all tribes fight together, all will be killed. But if we all join together, we can make a powerful fist. And I believe that. So may the Great Spirit be with each and every one of you. I want to thank the American Indian Movement. I am a member of the American Indian Movement, always been, for many, many years. And I know the struggle. I know the hardship. So I ask you, if you could do anything to protect the Glencoe Sacred Site, I can give you address to write the mayor of the city of Vallejo, write the people that are going to destroy this sacred site. And just like Perry said, this could be a violation of human rights, civil rights, violation of the Indian Religion Act of 1978, and it could be a hate crime, and it could be vandalism. We was to go over there and destroy their cemetery. What do you think they would do to me? It's nothing new. So I say to you, help us, whatever you could do, because your ancestors will be very proud of you, each and every one of you. Remember this day. Remember this day, because when they come for you in the morning, what are you going to do? Remember that. When they come for you in the morning, what are you going to do? Morning Star, my sister, she became my sister because I lost my 3 sisters. They were very active in the Native American community along with my mother. So I asked her, my sister, to step forward to speak about the Shell Mound, what we're walking for. And I want to thank each and every one of you for coming today and supporting Tony Gonzalez and the American Indian Movement. Thank you very much. Oh.
Sure. Shimmy Samway, greetings, my relatives. With respect to all of my elders here today, my name is Morning Star Gali. I'm a member of the Achamawi Band of the Pit River Nation. That was my Uncle Tony that said the prayer this morning. This is my daughter Talissa here that's gonna maybe share some words as well. I'm gonna keep our comments brief. We only have a few minutes, and I think that they want to show the film by Anne Marie Sayers, which is a short clip of the 13,000 remains that are being housed in UC Berkeley, and it shows the conditions of them being housed in cardboard boxes in the bottom of the basements, and the mouse traps that are down there, and just the really deplorable conditions that these ancestral remains are held in. In 2005, I joined with the Shell Mound Peace Walk that my auntie Janella LaRose and Karina Gould organized. And at the time, I remember there were a number of peace walks that were going on, I believe around nuclear issues going across the country. And myself, I was born in the AIM House in Oakland that Bill Wabapa ran at the time, and I was the first of a series of home births there, so I was familiar. It was right after the 1978 longest walk that I was born in, so I was familiar with the sacred runs and the peace walks that were happening at that time. And so my aunt told me we're gonna walk around the Bay Area, the whole peninsula, and there are 425 shell mounds that we're gonna go and visit, and we're gonna walk for 3 weeks. And I was just like, wow, that's pretty crazy, but I'm willing to join on. And I think during that summertime I had a dream about it, about walking from place to place and going to people's homes and visiting. And so even though it was my first semester in starting school and I wasn't sure how that was going to work, I was very committed and dedicated to going on to that walk. And I think the first day we walked 19 miles, which they had only told us it was going to be a short day, Perry. They had told us it was going to be 10, but we walked 19 miles that day. And in that, we did walking around the Bay Area here and being raised here, but actually walking it, from city to city and across all of those artificial boundaries and seeing the number of our ancestral, grave sites that are desecrated over. There's no protection for Ohlone people because they are not federally recognized. And so there's, as it was mentioned, there's shopping malls that are built over, there's swimming pools, there's apartment complexes, a lot of concrete. Even, I believe there was even a Holocaust memorial close to one that we went to over there. And so that was interesting to see that. And so my daughter was 2 at the time. And from then, we were participating in the Shell Mountain Walks and connecting with other sacred site struggles across Turtle Island. And within my own homeland, Medicine Lake is being threatened by Calpine Corporation. And some of you may know about that struggle. The most recent updates are that it's not only 2 40 megawatt power plants that are proposed to be built there by Calpine Corporation, but they're now proposing to build 5 100 megawatt power plants in that area, geothermal plants. And they're basically trying to offer the tribe $1 million in a goodwill gesture and saying that they're going to move ahead with the plans. And there's nothing that we can do about it. And in the English language, it's Medicine Lake. In our language, it's Satitla. And in our creation stories, that's the lake that the Creator bathed in and has left natural healing properties. And so throughout our lifetimes, when after my father passed away, I went to go bathe in the lake, and a number of my relatives regularly use that lake. And just as with the San Francisco Peaks that Wounded Knee had mentioned, there's this constant threat of desecration for recreational sites, to be built, for cabins to be there, for jet skis and boats to go on. But these are our sacred places. These are places that we go to gather medicine at. These are places that we go to constantly use, because we're also told that if we don't use them, that they're going to go away, right? They're going to disappear, that if we don't go and gather these acorns, if we don't go and hunt deer in that connection that we have with them, then these things are going to disappear from us. And so it's important that we go and continue to use them in that way. And so, as Perry mentioned also, I'm currently with the International Indian Treaty Council as the Community Liaison Coordinator, and in my support work, we formed a conference this past year that focused on international women's reproductive justice and environmental health. And we brought together women from all over the world, and they talked about their work in making these connections and the environmental threats within their homeland and the threats to our bodies, and in recognizing that our first environment is ourselves, is our own bodies. And so in making that connection, in protecting the land, I think it was Jessica Yee that mentioned, if we constantly talk about protecting the land, but we also need to talk about, especially as women, protecting our own bodies, because if there's no people, if we're constantly being poisoned, if we constantly have these health conditions that we're fighting, then there's not going to be any people to have that relationship there with the land. And so I'm going to end quickly so that we can show this film here with Anne Marie. There's a lot more that I'd like to say, and so maybe we'll touch on that later. But Tony's giving me different instructions here. Did you want Clyde to come up at this point? Okay, so ask for Clyde to come up, and we'll be able to continue this at a later time. But I have some information. The declaration that was written a number of months ago is available, and I can get that out to people. And I just want to quickly mention that on November 26th, we're asking for people to be out at Bay Street Mall, and Bay Street Mall is the largest shell mound, as Perry mentioned, and the shell mound was leveled to create the roadways and streets in the Albany and Berkeley area. There are still bodies underneath, a number of burials that are underneath this mall that people shop on a daily basis. And so we ask for people not to shop at this mall. And so on November 26th is more of an education awareness day where we go. It's the largest shopping day of the year, and we go and ask people to please not shop there, to go somewhere else and not shop on the graves of our ancestors that are there. And so we ask for everyone to join us. I think it's 10:30, 11 a.m. on that day. And with that, I'll hand it over to Clyde here.
Yeah, and before we do, I'd like to mention some of the things that are here around the room. We'll be talking about Leonard Peltier and political prisoners. That phone number to President Obama is still relevant. Okay, so everyone get that phone number. And, we're always tweeting and calling people up, and, that number should be used every morning. Okay, so let's get that number down, all right? I wrote down here the name of San Francisco, the original name. Okay, so we want to reclaim our original names, all right? So stick that in your forehead and keep that, some people call it pronunciation Chuchi, okay? And, the Ohlone people have different names for different little regions in this peninsula, okay? And this is a prominent name. And, in fact, it's at, I don't know if some of you might go to Mission Dolores over here in San Francisco. 1776. It's one of the original 21 missions here. But inside there, they have a place where they say the original name here in San Francisco, and they use that as well. So keep that name in your head. Okay, Clyde, and then we're going to have Clyde as a speaker after lunch. So Clyde backcourt.
How bonjour, Nigan the way we done, Disneyka, so Sishak, do Dane on Ishinabe, or Gitchida, Three Friars Society, gathering of the Sacred Pipe Sundance. I'm saying greetings to each and every one of you. Feel good right here this morning. My heart to see so many of you come out to carry on this important work and all of the efforts that were put together in 1968 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we felt that absolutely nothing was being done to upgrade the conditions that Indian people are forced to live under here in their own country. And absolutely nothing was being taught in the public and parochial school systems of America about Indian people. And we know why today. We know why today because our history was erased. Our traditional way of life was pushed aside, our ceremonies, our prayers. And most of America, we found out, was totally scholastically retarded when it comes to Indian people and their culture and their traditional way of life. So it's hard to even blame the teachers in the educational system today because that's the way they grew up, not being taught anything about our people. A people that didn't know use for a Bible, didn't know how to cuss or swear. Everything that they did, everything. They got up in the morning, the first thing they did is put their tobacco out. Asked the Creator for guidance that day. And no matter what it was, if you went hunting the buffalo or went fishing, tapped a maple sugar tree where I come from, or harvest the wild rice, plant a garden. You couldn't do anything, nothing like that, unless you had a ceremony, unless you had a prayer, you had a drum, you had a dance for that day. A time when every one of us were spiritual leaders, medicine people, every single one of us, and every single one of you in this room carries that medicine. And every single one of you in this room is a spiritual leader. Every single one of you. You carry that spirit in you. And you can help somebody in your community. You can help some elder. You can take a young brother or sister off the streets and give them shelter. And maybe even put them on that red road to survival. You are all spiritual leaders. You're all medicine people, every single one of you. in this room today. Remember that. So I'm honored to be here today. This area, this issue that you brothers, my brother here, Wounded Knee, this issue that you're dealing with goes back a long ways. Outside of Minneapolis, there's a place called Welch Village. We got a call one day from a farmer lady, a white woman, pulled her daughter out of an excavation site where they were digging up this village, this old Ho-Chunk village, Winnebago. Find out why they left her and all the questions that they want answered. But they were told not to go into the graves. And after weeks, funded by the United States Agriculture Department, by the universities in the area, given the money and given all the tools that they need, the screens and the picks and the shovels. After a couple of weeks, they got bored. These young college-bound students got bored. And they started drinking and smoking that PG. And they decided, well, maybe we ought to go check one of them graves out. Wonder why they don't want us to go in those graves. And so this lady called us. And she said that they're in their graves, and her daughter come home and told her about it. There wasn't too many of us in the movement at that time, but we loaded our cars up, 3 or 4 cars. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we drove in up on that hill. And all these young people were in the graves, and they had bones piled up all over, had their screens and all their logs and what they were finding. Arrowheads and all these other stuff were laying out. And we didn't let them get out of those graves. We started covering them all the way up to their knees before we stopped. And the highway patrol and all the sheriff's departments showed up. And those that ran down the hill, including the people that were allowing the instructors, our women chased them with switches, switching them as they went down the hill. And we gathered all those bones, put them in boxes, and took them to the State Historic Society, the State Indian Affairs Commission, called a big press conference. And showed them that, and we put a stop. And we actually introduced legislation. We asked for $260,000. We wanted to go into the Pioneer Cemetery in the heart of Minneapolis and dig it up, screen them, find out when they introduced Levi's, when they introduced tennis shoes and basketballs and all the other stuff that they brought here. Smallpox and all the diseases. Now we know we would have never done that. No matter how much money they gave us, we would never do anything like that because we have respect. But that legislation went through all the committees. I'm suggesting that happened here. Went through all the committees. We got to go and testify why we wanted that money, what we were going to do. Because we told them that's what they do to us. And by the time it got through that last committee and passed, it went all the way from started out as a felony to do that, then to a gross misdemeanor, and then to a misdemeanor. But they got our message. And we started the educational process. And I'd like to talk more on that, but I know we don't have the time. We went into Dixon Mounds not too many years ago in Bloomington, bigger than this building here, bigger than this whole block, where 46 tribes were buried. And up on the first ground level, when they bring in the tourists, you look down, they had glass cases over exposed bodies of our children, elders, skeletons. Some still had the feathers right into their skull. And they come by and eat their gum and potato chips and throw their bags down on them. And we put a stop to that. I'll talk about that later. We closed that place down. And out of that came the national legislation to supposedly protect sacred sites and burial grounds. But it'll never happen unless we force that to happen. I'm just going to say that much. I want to thank you for being here, and I know Tony's getting a little nervous here because he knows I can go on for a couple hours, you know. But I would like to introduce this bill. I'd like to introduce this drum because where I come from, when we have our prayers, in our ceremonies, we always have the drum welcome us. I want to ask them to sing a 4 push-up welcome song in the American Indian Movement song for us. Thank you very much. We'll get together later. Miigwech.
Oh, thank you, Clyde Belcourt. And we're going to be breaking, like I said, with the drummers. This is Portland AIM drummers. All right, so if you got some spare change also, we're going to put it out here, so lay it out, okay? And I hope the brothers don't mind. Some of us pick up our chairs and let's stack them and put them in the other room. Okay? 1 o'clock sharp. Be here. We got lunch coming in by local San Francisco youth organization, Homies. Homies is providing lunch, and we'll have that in the other room as well. So grab a plate and you can eat out here in the patio. Ho!